Woke up on a Monday with my coffee going cold. Opened up the portal like a story to be told. The floor was set to trigger when a new form came in, but the SharePoint list was broken and I couldn't begin. Run history said succeeded in a little shade of green, but nothing hit the inbox like it never had been. Oh, these are real life power, automate scenarios where the trigger fires but nobody knows. Real life power, automate scenarios, a simple little flow in the way it goes. The way it goes, the way it goes. The approval sat for 30 days without a yes or no. The Excel file was locked by Dave and had nowhere to go. I forgot to set the time zone and it ran at midnight. 5,000 rows of throttling errors. Everything was fine. Document your connections, name your steps with care, add a compose action just to see what the data puts in there. Oh, these are real life power, automate scenarios where the trigger fires and everybody knows. Real life power, automate scenarios, a simple little flow, and now it goes. Now it finally goes. Run history, all green now, all green now.
Awesome. So, it ended abruptly, but it's okay. It's fine. Oh, well, okay. Welcome back to the M365 show. I'm Fortu, joined by my wonderful co-hosts Marcel and Isabel. Today we are getting practical, really practical. We are talking about Power Automate flows that are running right now in real businesses, solving real problems. Not demos, not keynote slides, the real thing.
Yes, and our guest today has been in the trenches of automation for years. Tatum started as a one-person learning and development team, stumbled into Power Platform, and never looked back. So she's an educator and a builder. So today she's here to share what automation actually looks like when it works. Drew, welcome to the show.
Drew, yeah, and a warm welcome from my side too. I'm a big fan. Drew, let's start with your origin story. You didn't came from a traditional developer background. How did you spending your days building Power Automate solutions?
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for having me. It's nice to meet you guys. So I actually found my way into the Power Platform, I think, in a pretty unconventional way. So I was working as a one-person learning and development team, just trying to figure out how to create better systems, better processes, and honestly, just make things work a little more efficiently for me. And that's when I stumbled into the Power Platform. And I think it completely changed how I approached my role and roles after that. So I actually remember my first automation pretty clearly. I was manually sending the same onboarding email to every new employee about a few times a week. And I finally hit a breaking point and was like, I can't spend all this time sending the same email. And so I Googled how to send the same email automatically, which led me down a Power Automate black hole, if you will. So I built my first flow without knowing anything about what I was stepping into. And when it worked, it completely changed how I saw what was possible with my role and even other people's roles in my organization. So since then, I've spent the last few years building solutions and trying to stay current with how fast tools are evolving. And figuring out how to make them practical for real teams. At the core of it, I'm an educator. I used to be an 8th grade teacher. I love teaching, but I also love the building side of it. So most of the work I do sits right kind of at that intersection of helping people understand the why behind the tools, while also showing them how to create these real world automations that are making their day easier. And so I like to help people move away from this like repetitive work idea and focus more on the work that really matters to them, which I kind of call task freedom.
I love that, task freedom. That's the concept we want to anchor today's episode. So, because at its core, Power Automate isn't about magic. It's about moving the right information into the right place so people can actually make decisions. Let's dig into that. So, let me start with this. A lot of the best automations are really about visibility. The data already exists, but people don't see it unless it's surfaced in the place where they already work. Isabel, what do you think?
Oh, Drew, let's start with what you call visibility automation. The data already exists somewhere in the business, but it's just not in front of the right person. So at the right moment as well. How do you explain the concept to someone who never really thought about automation that way?
Yeah. So I think that most people think automation like means doing work for people all the time. But that's not what I've seen for a lot of the like highest impact flows I build. Those are really about visibility of data, where the data already exists somewhere in the business. It might be sitting in a SharePoint list, in a third-party system, somebody's inbox, a spreadsheet. And the problem is people don't see it right when they need to make a decision. So instead of asking somebody to go pull a report or information from somewhere else, I like to just surface that information into the place where they're already working. So whether that's their email or their Teams or a planner task, the goal is to remove the friction between the data and the action.
Yeah, and so it's not about doing the work for people. It's about reducing the distance between data and the decision. So that's a really clean way to frame it. What does look like in practice?
Yeah, so I think a simple but kind of powerful example is a weekly finance summary. So instead of managers having to go check a system or a document, the flow would send them a structured email every week that shows them maybe all expense submissions from the last 7 days. Maybe those ones that are pending approval are at the top of that list. And I think the value is really in the timing and the placement of that data, where you're putting that exact information they need right in front of them when they can take action.
But let's stay on that finance example. A weekly expense summary email sounds deceptively simple, but there's real logic behind it. Please walk us through how you. Yeah, sorry. My connection is bad. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
I can hear you.
Okay, because I heard my voice, so I was a bit confused. But let's come back. Well, can you walk us through on how you built that well and where it can go wrong, discussing the whole finance example?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing I do is usually take a step back and look at like the foundation first and not really the flow. So a really common issue I see is that data is scattered amongst all kinds of systems in organizations. So you'll have one team tracking things in Excel where another team might be using a third-party tool or a different file completely. And then suddenly your automation is really stitching everything together before it actually can provide value for people. And I think that's where things are breaking down for organizations. Ideally, you'd want a centralized system. And depending on the size of your organization, that could be something like a SharePoint list or a Dataverse table, where all those submitted expenses live in a consistent structure. So once that's in place, the actual flow is usually pretty simple. Most of them, I would say, are only a handful of steps, where we start with a scheduled trigger that's running weekly. I like to use a get items action, and I really enjoy using OData filters. So where we can pull only specific approvals or specific items based on those columns in your data. So for example, you could pull only pending approvals from the last 7 days, or only data in the last 7 days over a certain dollar threshold. So after that, I usually take a step to shape or format the data so it's actually readable for people. Oftentimes when we're getting data from a data source, we don't need all of the columns that are in there. And then sending it out through either an email connector or a Teams message connector. And I really think the main complexity in these types of examples is just making sure your data is clean and the logic reflects how the business is actually defining what should be included in the email.
Okay. So when we're talking about these data, so where does the data typically live in visibility flows? Are you pulling from SharePoint, Dataverse, Excel, a finance system? People who doesn't know or automate, what are the possibilities?
Yeah. I would say that most of the time I'm working with a SharePoint list or Dataverse, and in the organizations I've built solutions from, a lot of them are working in similar ways as the core data source, because I think that they're the most reliable options inside the Microsoft ecosystem. So not every organization has access to Dataverse. It needs increased licensing. And I think that's completely fine. I think, honestly, the majority of the solutions that I'm building are using SharePoint lists. I think that they're way more capable than people think if you treat them properly. And by that, I mean things like using those OData filters so that you're not pulling in unnecessary data into your flow. Turning on pagination when you're working with larger data sets, designing your columns intentionally so that logic stays clean. And then if you're bringing in third-party systems, I think the big thing I always tell organizations is to validate that connector first, make sure it actually exists in your tenant, make sure it works the way you expect before you design anything around it. The worst place, I think, to discover a limitation is after you've already built the flow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's based on my experience too. But there's another one, I think, and this is and how do you stop these workflows from becoming noise? Because the moment a manager starts ignoring your weekly email, the whole value disappears. And I know there's for example, so 30 days runtime for flows could be a problem here, or?
Yeah, definitely. I think noise is one of the fastest ways to kill a good automation. So when I'm building something like this, I try to be really intentional about 3 specific things. So first is only sending information that requires action. So if a manager or somebody opens an email and there's nothing they really need to do with that data, I think in this specific example, that's a huge miss, right? Over time, they stop trusting it. They stop opening your emails. They just straight delete them. So I try to always start by filtering really aggressively and only include items that actually need people's attention. And I think to do this well, you have to have discussions with the team you're developing for, and you have to at least implement kind of one or multiple rounds of feedback. Sometimes what I'm assuming is best as the builder is not really what the person who is receiving the email or the automation, what they actually want. Second, I'd say make the format easy to scan. Most people are not reading your emails line by line. They're really trying to scan for important information. So I try to structure it with clear headings, using tables, maybe highlight or bold certain like numbers or counts at the top of that email. So, and putting it into something readable, like you have 3 pending approvals, where that number 3 would be like a sum or a total of those items in your flow. And I think that alone can drive action. I've been really loving lately having Copilot generate some more complex HTML formatting that I think is helping to increase readability even more. And then third is be intentional with the timing and the frequency of these data delivery flows. So weekly might make sense in one case, daily in another. I'm always asking when I build these type of flows for people is, when is this information actually useful? Sending it too early or too often can also make this feel like noise for people that ends up just getting your automated emails ignored, even if your content is really good. So I think if you get those 3 right, people start to rely on your emails and your automations instead of ignoring them.
Yeah, so one topic to this, we had a customer situation where the customer said to me, our runtime for the approvals are 120 days. I said, whoa, perfect. A perfect way to do this with a flow. And so we built a crazy recreation part, and so this is, I think, a big disadvantage for flow. So if it takes more than 30 days, because a state machine will work, but not for a longer time than 30 days. And this is an important part for designing or workflow and sub-workflow decisions, I think.
Yeah, setting like end timers on certain actions, especially with approvals. That way you can remind people, or you could reassign that approval to somebody else as a fallback. Those timeout settings are really important for things like approvals.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Then from my side, anyone has to ask something in between? Otherwise, I will jump in. Okay, great. Cool. Drew, let's move into our second category. And this one hits close to home for a lot of people. It's the coordination tags, the recurring reminders, the deadline follow-ups, the just checking in that lives in someone's head until something gets dropped. How does automation fix that?
I think that this category is all about getting things out of people's heads. So a lot of work in organizations relies on someone remembering to follow up, or remembering to send a reminder, or remembering to check in on a deadline. And I think that's where our brains break down, right? Computers can keep track of these things way better than I can with the tasks in my head. So automation really turns those things into a system. So instead of relying just on my memory or my paper notes, we're relying on that computer automation logic and timing. It's going to create consistency, which I think is what's missing a lot when we're relying on our memory.
Mm-hmm. So you have built these kind of flows in learning and development context, like reminding the coordinators when the class materials are due, or when logistics needs to be confirmed, or pre-session planning email should go out. All these based on session type and delivery format. How dynamically does that actually get?
Yeah, they can be pretty dynamic. So if we're talking about just a learning and development setup, we might have different timelines for virtual versus in-person sessions, or different reminders for internal versus client training, different stakeholders depending on the session type or the session topic. And so you can really design flows that calculate timelines automatically and trigger those different reminders based on all of those conditions. So it really starts simple by saying like, oh, I just want to send an email to somebody, or I want to remind somebody of a task, but it can scale to match how your business actually operates.
Yeah, but based on session timed and delivery format implies some real conditional logic underneath. How do you build that branching without flow turning into something nobody can maintain 6 months later?
This is where I think things can get messy really fast if you're not careful. So when you hear or when I hear different session types or different delivery formats, it's easy to start stacking conditions everywhere in your flow. And that's usually what's making something unmaintainable. So in these real world builds, I try to store things like session type or delivery format as like clear standardized values in the data source, using a choice column, using structured branching like the switch action instead of repeating the same logic or the same conditions in multiple places. And then lastly, the not fun one that no one wants to do, I think, is keeping naming really clean. So anyone opening the flow understands what each section is doing. So the goal is to make sure that when someone or myself or yourself in a few months revisits the flow later, they can update it without breaking everything. They know exactly what every single step is supposed to do. And I think that's the difference between something that lasts just a few weeks and a flow that's going to last years and scale with your team.
Thank you. Now my question is, what about the construction and facilities world? Permit deadlines, inspection dates, renewal checkpoints with different messages going to field staff, coordinators, and managers depending on how close the deadline is. That's basically a mini notification engine. How do you architect that?
Before I build something like this, I would spend the majority of my time asking questions up front with that team and not writing the logic myself. So I'm usually trying to understand things like, what are the key dates that people actually care about on this team? Who needs to be notified at each stage? What happens if nothing gets done? Again, that's like a not fun one to think about, but what happens if you remind somebody? You can send all the reminders in the world, and if they don't do the work, then what needs to happen? And what level of urgency should each stage have? And then once I have those answers, then I'm translating it into a flow, and it becomes clearer and simpler to build. So for example, if I hear something like 30 days before X date, notify the coordinator. So that would become an OData filter. We're comparing today's date to the deadline, and then we place that notification where that coordinator is working. And again, that's another question I ask. Do you want notifications in Teams or in email? And everybody usually has a different answer. Or if I hear 7 days before and this task isn't done, escalate to a manager. That can become a totally different flow with its own filters and a different audience. And then if I hear something like day of, send a final check to, the entire team. That might become another checkpoint that goes into, say, a team's channel so that the entire team can see instead of that individual notification. So the flow is just a reflection of like all of those questions and decisions that you make up front with those teams. And if the team's thinking is clear on all of those answers, which honestly is the part that takes the most time, is getting people to like really solidify the answers to those things, then the build is usually pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm. So Drew, so what I'm hearing is that requirement gathering is a very important skill before creating automation. That's, I would say, most of my time defining what is the business process, and a business process that everybody is willing to follow through with or document it in that way. So that is very important, to ask the right questions.
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
want to zoom out a little bit for a second. So you describe automation is a reliability tool, so not just an efficiency tool. Can you unpack that distinction? Because I think it will change how people should think about where to apply it.
Yeah, efficiency, I think, is about saving time, where reliability is about making sure things don't get missed. So a good example is reminders. So you might save 5 minutes by automating a reminder instead of sending it yourself. But the real value is that it's always going out at the exact right time to the right person without failure, right? I've seen teams that are technically efficient, but things still slip because they're relying on their memory or writing things down or manual follow-up. And I think that's where automation is really changing things. When the process becomes reliable, those deadlines stop slipping through the cracks. People stop chasing each other for updates, which I love. And then there's a shared confidence that things are happening when they should on that team. And that shift is usually a bit more impactful than the time saving itself of sending the message.
Yeah. So, yeah, perfect. Let us come to next segment, and this would be the topic intake to action. My question here, something enters the system and the next step just happen. Drew, why is it such a powerful place to apply automation?
Yeah, this is probably the most satisfying category. I think this is probably the most common place people start. I usually don't recommend beginners start here. And the reason for that is a lot of people jump straight into these like intake to action flows because they sound really powerful, right? Like, of course, I want things to automatically like do all of my work for me. But I think in reality, they involve a lot more moving parts like multiple systems or this branching logic or dependencies between steps. And I think if you're just getting started with building flows, I'd recommend with starting those visibility or reminder-based flows first. They're a little simpler to build and they still deliver a lot of value to your team. Intake flows are powerful because they replace these like manual handoffs between people. So instead of somebody receiving a request and figuring out what to do next, that system can immediately kick off the next steps. So it's a great category of automations, just one that benefits, I think, from a bit more experience before you go into that build.
So talking about intaking forms, let's make it more concrete with the HR onboarding scenario. So if a new employee record is added where welcome packets get sent out, this is very common. Every organization has this, So you set up the tasks to get assigned, IT get notified, the manager gets a whole checklist. You need to do X, Y, Z, all this. So that sounds clean when you say it fast, but what does it actually take to build that reliably?
Yeah, when you say it out loud, it does sound simple, but I think what you're really describing is either one trigger leading to multiple coordinated actions across different people or systems, or even different flows for each of those actions with their own trigger. So I think for beginners, that can feel a little bit overwhelming, but I usually recommend starting with one of the actions first. So for example, just sending the welcome email, right? My very first flow. Once that's working, then you can layer in those additional actions, right? Taking off just sending the welcome packet out, that, saves time in and of itself on your plate, where you can start to layer in the rest. You don't need to do everything at one time. And again, I'll go back to, I think, what I've been saying for the last 30 minutes. Before I build anything, I'm always meeting with the team or the subject matter experts, and I'm asking questions. So asking like, what happens when a new employee is added or when they're submitted in the form? Who is owning each part of the process, so I know who to include in these notifications or emails or tasks? What order should things happen in? That can help me create separate flows with their own triggers. What information does each person need? And then when I have those answers, I can map those to actual actions in Power Automate. So something like sending a welcome packet becomes an email action, right? And we're just attaching that same document that we always do. Notifying IT might become a different email or a Teams message. Assigning setup tasks might become planner tasks or list items that we're assigning to somebody. A manager checklist could be formatted as an email or a SharePoint list entry. And so I don't always build everything at once, especially when I'm first trying to get started. I try to start with an MVP, make sure it works, and then expand on that. And then on those different failure points, people don't always want to think about them up front, right? As far as like content and videos, those always seem to do the worst. People don't want to think about what happens if things break. And you might not need to design for every edge case in version 1, especially if you're building internally. At some point, I think the flow is going to 100% behave in a way you don't expect, and you just need to be ready to adjust it. And I think that's part of building real world solutions.
I have a small hint to it. So I built a solution with my product team here, an on and offboarding system. And so we want to build up a full-blown onboarding and offboarding process. And this could be with plus all the stuff in Entra, plus all the stuff for licensing, plus all the other stuff regarding identity access management. So I think regarding to the idea of what you can do with Power Automate or with Logic Apps 2, I think is still unbelievable and could be an endless job. For example, a really, really good example to start simple and small and make it as a big solution. Really amazing for SMEs, for small companies with not identity access management system. I really like your example. Really, really like that.
Cool, thank you. Something I wanted to say. So the before and after is so vivid. Before, someone is manually forwarding emails, tracking tasks on a sticky note, chasing IT. After, the system handles the repeatable steps and people focus on the actual work. What was your own before and after moment with onboarding automation, Drew?
Before automation, I was doing everything manually, right? I might be copying and pasting from some templates, but I'm the one opening email, clicking the new email button, and it sounds kind of crazy, right? Like, of course, yeah, you click the new email button, that takes 2 seconds, but all of those things add up. And they're that like task freedom I was talking about at the beginning, where that time my brain could be spent doing better things. So every time somebody joined my previous organization, I was sending those onboarding emails, keeping track of who started in a spreadsheet, trying to remember what I had already sent to them and what I hadn't. And it was really working when we were a smaller organization, but it didn't scale. And it created a lot of mental overhead for me. So after I built the flow and multiple flows, the moment a new employee was added, everything started to trigger automatically, right? The right emails were going out to people. The right people were informed that new people were joining their team. And I didn't have to track any of those things manually. From a team perspective, I think it made things feel more structured, more consistent. Again, people were getting the right information at the right time instead of waiting on me. And from my manager's perspective, it shifted how my work was seen. So instead of just executing tasks, right, instead of just sending emails, I was really improving the system behind those tasks and those emails. And it gave me a lot of time back. So it let me focus more on building and improving our team rather than just keeping up with repetitive work. And I think that manager perspective is huge in getting them to change how they see your work.
I 100% agree. Going from operations to the engineer mindset, you're going above than what breaks and what you're fixing, but more thinking structurally in a business perspective. How are you providing value to the company and creating new standardized systems? That's what really Automate really have clicked for me, where it's not just I'm adding this for myself, but I'm actually creating a difference as a business impact. So that's really
Absolutely.
cool that you have touched on that portion.
Yeah, I started getting invited into rooms and meetings that I didn't think I would be. And they were like, we just want you to bring your little pen and paper and decide what could be an automation. And I was like, done. I can do that. I can make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You really like that. it's a good way of thinking to make things better in an organization. But let us talk about the legal and procurement version of this. A contract or purchase request comes in. It's get routed for approval, status gets logged, the right people get notified at each stage. Where does that get complicated in the real world?
I see the complexity kind of showing up in 3 different areas. The first is different approval paths. So rarely are our approvals a straight path, right? If you have a small organization, they might be, yeah, we just like always ask this one person, or it's always their manager. But in bigger organizations, I see you might have approvals based on amount thresholds. How do you keep track of those amount thresholds? Where am I pulling that data in? Or is it hard-coded into my flow that then you have to change in your Power Automate flow later? Are your approvals different based on department or the type of request that's coming in? Are you allowing one form to submit these different types of requests? And these all mean that your flow has to branch correctly or make sure that the right person is involved every time. One of the things that I like doing is trigger conditions. So you can set up different flows for those different amount thresholds or different departments. And that way you're not like creating these crazy branching flows. It does add, a layer where now you have multiple flows to keep up with, but it keeps things a bit cleaner. I'd say second are rejections and loops. So if something gets rejected, what should happen next? Does it go back to the original requester? Does it restart the process? If things or that logic isn't clear, then things get really stuck or duplicated. A lot of times I've seen, if it's just rejected, it just like is done. And in a real business organization, that's not usually the case. And then third would be status tracking. So people want visibility into where things are at in these processes. It's nice that we know as the builder on our end where things are, but your flow shouldn't just be routing approvals. It should be updating the status somewhere consistently, loop in one of those other types of automations where you're notifying people of that status. And then if that breaks, trust in the process is dropping quickly. So I'd say it's everything around, that approval that needs to be thought through really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when it becomes a complex approval, so me and my colleagues, we also do Power Automate, right? We'll have a SharePoint list about all the routing possibilities where the Power Automate can just check, oh, we're in this status, therefore these are the next approvers. So it's really, very flexible. The hardest part is getting the business requirement together. So in this process, we talked about these intake flows that often touch multiple systems at once. Sometimes it's Microsoft Forms, lists, email, Teams, or even ERP or CRM. How do you think about integration and complexity when you're scoping all these out?
When I'm thinking about integrations in our flows, I try to keep each system focused on what it does best. So, for example, forms are going to collect external input really cleanly. And I say cleanly, maybe with an asterisk here. Sometimes the cleanest way to collect external feedback on a form doesn't produce great data internally. So again, you're creating more flows and opportunities for you as the builder to store that data cleanly somewhere. I'd say SharePoint or Dataverse stores and tracks data extremely well, like that's its main job, right? And email and Teams is for handling communication. And the flow should really connect each of these pieces, but never try to force one tool to do everything. And I think that's maybe the fun part, and also what people might not like about Microsoft is that all of these different tools have their own really specific job, but you can't try to force one of them to do everything. And then from a practical standpoint, I try to validate the connectors early before designing the solution, especially if it's a third-party tool. Right, all of the Microsoft tools, I would say majority of the actions are in that free connector list, but I've seen organizations block, a lot of third-party tools. So it looks like you can build with those, but when you go to save or publish or put it into production, it doesn't actually work. So making sure you validate those early on with your IT teams if you have them, or whoever's maintaining your IT. And then keeping the data model simpler, or if it's not simple, right, trying to keep your data structure as best as possible. So whether that's a star schema with multiple tables of data in all of these places with ID numbers or related columns, that's going to keep everything a lot easier to maintain. And then avoid unnecessary handoffs between systems if they're not adding value. Okay, so the more systems you involve, the more potential failure points you're creating in your flow. So just try to keep it as simple as possible while still meeting the scoping requirement.
Thank you very much. This is something that I've also seen many times, that people tend to do everything in one system alone, trying to replicate as many things, functionalities, but the systems are not tailored for this behavior, and so it drives up costs, it drives up maintenance, it causes additional problems, and at some point people start to have doubts about the tool in itself, which is creating a negative halo effect on the whole product, where there are core things that might actually work. Letting the systems do their appropriate work and focus on every system to do what it can do best is the best approach I can think of. But it's a common issue that many people also often drove by customers, are basically trying to replicate as many options in one or two few systems as possible, and then running into problems later. This happens regularly, I've seen. Cool. So for the next question, I should rename myself to Darth Fortu. You will soon understand why. So we can't have this conversation without talking about the dark side. So tell us about a flow that broke in production. What happened? How did you find out? And what did you actually learn from it? Come to the dark side.
Yeah, right. I have had all kinds of flow failures, and I think that's just part of being a self-taught builder, right? A lot of the times when I get into a class about Power Automate, I tell them, like, get real comfortable with the word failure. It will fail, and that's a good thing, right? We don't and aren't going to get it right on the first time every time. So the first thing I always do is make it easy for people to tell me when something isn't working on a flow. So I might not always be checking a flow, or I might not have, I've been a bad developer and I haven't set up, those flow failure notifications. So in larger organizations, that might be something like a more formal feedback form. But in smaller organizations, it can just be as simple as keeping your door or your team's chat open to people. And so I always tell people, like, I want to know when it doesn't work, or you receive an email and it doesn't look like what you expected. Like, maybe that's what we built on version 1, but it's not what version 2 needs to be. And I think the second piece is trust. Every time a flow doesn't do what someone expects, trust drops a little. So you have to be intentional about building that trust back up, even if you think that you built something exactly to a T what they've asked for. If those expectations change, you want to be able to receive that feedback and have that version 2. So a couple ways I do that: I'll pull someone in and ask them to help shape the next version so that it meets their expectations, which usually turns them from like a doubter into an advocate for your process. Or fix the issue as quickly as I can and communicate clearly about when it will be resolved, when it's done and resolved. So I think it's not always about, what the flow failure is or fixing the flow, as much as like maintaining confidence in the flow itself.
Thank you.
That sounds easy, but I want to ask about the emotional side of this, because when you build something, it depends on, and it breaks. That's a very specific kind of stress. I know it. And how do you manage that as a builder?
There's definitely a level of responsibility that comes with building flows, right? So in the real world, I think it looks like getting a message that something didn't run and knowing it's impacting a client or a team. That, of course, feels stressful. Or having to trace through a flow quickly to figure out what failed. The flow, like the failure messages, aren't always 100% clear. And I know we'll get to kind of talking about Copilot, but Copilot is a huge help at this stage. You can tell it, like, here's the flow failure I received. Here's the expression that's inside of this action. Here's maybe the data where we're trying to transform. I also think like explaining to stakeholders what happened and what you're doing about it to fix it also just kind of deflates the stress a bit. And so over time, I think I've learned to manage that as a builder by building better monitoring. So I'm catching things earlier, right? My first flow where I was sending an email to new employees, I had no idea that you could like send an email to yourself if it failed. I just hoped it didn't fail. So as I've grown, building that monitoring in, documenting your flows, whether that's comments, naming them, actual like flow documentation that you're keeping somewhere in SharePoint so that troubleshooting is faster in the future. And then structuring your logic so failures are easier to isolate. So for example, like one of the, like I calculate dates a lot, right? If we're thinking about this due date and we need a notification 7 days before that, I might try to like calculate that previously inside the actual notification. Well, if that's the one piece that's breaking or the one piece of logic that's not working, it's harder to isolate that if you have that all in one action instead of just putting it into a compose action, calculating that date. And then if that fails, that's a lot easier to isolate and fix simply. I think the stress or deflating the stress becomes less about reacting. They're not telling you that you as a human or as a builder are terrible and the worst. They're just saying, hey, I thought it would work this way and it hasn't. So I think it's more about being prepared for those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100% agree. It's not about if it will fail, the question is when it will fail and then what happens. So you talked a little bit about monitoring. So how do you actually know a flow's healthy? Or because the default failure email sometimes is not enough. Like what does real observation look like on your flows?
I think real monitoring means not relying on those default failure emails all the time. So maybe you're logging those details of the flow or the flow run somewhere central, right? Because our flow run history only stays in Power Automate for 28 days. We want to get that log maybe somewhere external from Power Automate. Notifications for critical failures. So maybe the failure is a certain type or a certain step, and we want to know that immediately. And a way to quickly trace what happened. Okay, so if we're logging those failures, we can log exactly what happened. So I think in practice, something simple like writing key steps or outcomes to a SharePoint list could give you a lightweight monitoring system. The main goal, I think, is that when something goes wrong, you don't want to start from zero trying to figure it out, or worst case, right? Like you're gone, you're on vacation, you've passed the flow over to somebody else and they have no idea where to start.
Okay. What comes into my mind, and this touches also Marcel's beloved topic, is governance, environment, strategy, solution, aware flows, naming conventions. What happens when the person who built the flow leaves the company? What does grown-up Power Automate look like at scale?
I think kind of grown up Power Automate. I don't know if I'm a grown up yet. I don't know if I want to be. But we have flows inside of solutions. Okay. We have clear naming conventions on those flows inside of our solutions. We have environments with a purpose, right? We're not just building in the default environment. We have this structure of environment set up and we're deploying into each environment appropriately. Documentation that somebody else can follow, right? I think I always try to think of, and hopefully other people do too, is that you don't want to be the owner of this thing forever, right? Think of all the flows you're building for your organization. You don't want to maintain all of that. And maybe that's just wishful thinking, but make sure that somebody else could maintain this and could pass this off in your dreamland if you're able to. And then I think in practice, this means you're not just thinking about your own flow and the specific flow that you're building. You want to think about how this is fitting into kind of like a a Power Automate ecosystem in your organization, right? So how does one flow affect the other? Maybe one triggers another, maybe one's updating a system and that system is then pulling notifications into people's email, right? A lot of times our flows can get interconnected. So name flows so people understand what they do without opening them. And by them, I mean like each specific step. Group related flows into solutions so that they can be moved or managed together, and making sure somebody else could step in and maintain it, I think.
Yeah, but here's the tension I always feel. If you want guardrails to stop citizen developers from creating chaos, but the moment you look everything down, you kill the innovation. So how do you walk that line?
Yeah, I think, frankly, the first way I walk the line is I don't work in IT. I want to build solutions that work for other people, and I want to teach people how to build their solutions. So I don't want to be the person that locks everything down. But I think it's definitely a balance, right? You want to give people the ability to build and experiment and solve problems in the right place in the Power Platform, which requires some training. But you also need guardrails so that they're sustainable in larger organizations. So I think the answer is education and structure instead of restricting people. Help them build really well instead of preventing them from building at all.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I know we're a little bit short on time, but we have to talk about AI and Copilot. So Copilot and Power Automate AI Builder with the new agent capabilities. What genuinely have changed in how you built day to day?
Copilot has definitely sped up huge parts of the process for me. I would say it's really great at helping me draft expressions, things that used to take a long time to type out. I'd have my notepad out on my computer, right? And I'd be typing these long expressions instead of using the little teeny expression editor box. Copilot is really great at explaining what actions are doing. And so something I use it for a lot is helping me create the documentation, right? I just build something for weeks. I made sure all of the steps are correct. I don't want to go through and write this document so other people can take it over. I have Copilot help me do that. Helping me think through logic. So, hey, here's the problem. Help me think through how my data source should be set up, or how should I set up the logic to this flow? I think where I've seen the least success right now is asking Copilot to actually build the flow for you. I think you still need a strong understanding of how Power Automate works, how you should update your flows in Power Automate, and how to fix it when something goes wrong. I think of Copilot as more of an accelerator to my build and not a replacement.
Yeah, and a small hint to our last show with Catherine Han and John Leo. Really cool what were built with Copilot Studio to build Power Automate workflows with Copilot. So really great work from him. But so this, my honest question, is Copilot actual writing flows for you? I understand not. But are you building by hand most time, or do you mix that? Is it a real split? How do you see that?
Yeah, as far as right now, nothing is actually hands-on in Power Automate building things for me yet. I'd say that Copilot is acting more like a 60%, 70% assistant. So it's helping with those things like writing expressions, bouncing ideas off of it, or even generating questions I should be asking stakeholders. But I'm still the one, designing, building, validating everything. I find as a small example, It never suggests coalesce as an expression. So knowing those little things as a builder is still really valuable, right? Like the condition you're asking me to build or the if statement like could be done so much easier. But if you just rely on Copilot, you don't have that.
And the assistance is why it's called Copilot and not programmer XYZ. So that's the point, right? So I think that I'm still I have the opinion that the naming was the greatest thing of Microsoft calling it Copilot. It's my honest opinion here, because this is, if you have if you are a professional and you know to what to pay attention to, this is a great accelerator and can be of great help. But as always, you need to take a look at what is provided. This is like always, whether it's a co-pilot or a junior consultant that provides work, you always need to do some supervising. That's the reality. Now, looking ahead, you talk about helping people achieve task freedom in a world where AI is accelerating everything. What should builders be learning right now to stay relevant and ahead of the curve?
I'd say if you're thinking about staying relevant, focus on understanding the processes behind things and not just the tools, right? We have the access with Copilot and AI to help us with what button to click in the tool or things like that. Knowing how your data is flowing through a system or even your organization, understanding data is a huge part of designing good automations. And then design with clarity and intent, right? We want people to be able to take this over. We want to know the final intention of what people want from this build before we start designing. So AI is going to keep improving, I think, but the ability to structure a problem and design a solution is still going to be extremely invaluable.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. Because AI helps you with what it is, like the tools you're talking about, but why of the intentionality and how the best practices, the data should flow through one system to another. That is very, intentional. That will never change of what the best practices is. Should we dive into the question, or do we have time to answer some questions?
So I have time. So Drew, do you have time too? So we have really good questions. I saw it. I would show this
let's
one.
get into it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a
So
long
what
one.
do you want to read, or should I read?
Yeah, I will try to read. Hello, from Claudia. Hello, it is possible to have all emails automatically updated daily based on the sender's email address. I work in finance and receive a lot of emails, so I'd like to have one overview of the emails I receive from each customer. Can this be set up so that emails containing attached transfer now files are marked as important for me? I wanted to highlight the most important points and let me know when customers have questions for me.
Ooh, that's a huge one. Okay. Okay, so I'd say first, the hardest things to pull or parse from an email are going to be the actual body of the email. Okay. Mm-hmm. The easy things to categorize in Power Automate with an email are going to be your subject line and who it's from, and if there are attachments. So I'd say if you want like a simple roundup, right, of I want all of the subject lines of the emails from X sender's email sent to me every day, that's a simple flow. Where it gets more complex is if you need to parse through the actual body of the email and have it flag certain things. And then let's see, was there another question in there?
Yes.
You can flag emails as important with Power Automate as well.
Oh, so sorry.
No, that's okay. We can go to the next one. I was just making sure I covered everything.
Okay.
How would you securely store API keys?
Next question is how you securely store API keys, passwords, and connections information in Power Automate.
Thank you, Marcel. I laugh like.
So I'll be 100% honest. I don't have an IT background. I don't have a ton of like DLP experience. So I would say the best way that I've found for building is using my own connection if I'm in somebody else's environment or another organization's environment. If I'm in my own environment, building with my own connections, and then teaching people how to, like, sharing it with people, teaching them how to add in their own connections. I know that there's way more complex and more nuance to that than I have. But that's just
short answer, Azure keyword.
Azure keyword. Well,
Yeah, with secure input and output, and when is everything fine?
And then when using connections, using a service account. So don't always use your own account. Well, you have to think about if it is your own personal workflow or if this is a process. If this is a process, use a service account.
Yeah, good call out. And it looks like somebody answered that too.
Yeah.
You guys are awesome.
Yeah. There's active community. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We have further questions?
So, and the last question.
Okay, I will give it a shot, but I think I will be interrupted by Marcel. Let's see. How would you process thousands of records efficiently without hitting Power Automate limits?
Yeah, I would think through first if I actually need all thousands of records in this specific flow. If the answer is no, then you want to use things like trigger conditions or OData filters or some way to filter that data down before it actually enters in your flow. If you do actually need thousands of records, you'll want to look through things like pagination or those limits in the settings for your action. But I'd say filters are going to be your best friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's all the questions that we have, right?
I think
Yes.
so, yes.
Oh.
I think we are at the end.
Drew, if you could give any, like a beginner, one piece of advice to someone who is about to build the first real production flow, not a tutorial, not a demo, but something a business will actually spend and depend on, what would you tell them?
I think, and this is just from my experience, the biggest thing I'd say is start paying attention to the problems around you before you start building anything. So I would listen in meetings, I'd listen to my teammates, I'd notice the things in my work that I repeat myself or processes that feel clunky, and those are where my best ideas came from. Once you have that list of ideas, that list of like, you don't need to be mean about it, right? Like Judy in accounting really could like do this better. But start small, right? You don't need to solve a company-wide problem on day one. If you have a friend or a teammate, offer to build something simple for them. And that can be a really great place to start. Once you and your coworkers start to see something work in Power Automate, I promise you're gonna, number one, build confidence in yourself, but you're going to have a lot of people start asking you to fix their problems as well. And I'd say you don't want to try to fix 10 problems at 10% each. You want to try to start small, fix one problem 100%.
So perfect. So I think we are through for today. So we have talked about, I think was an amazing show with a lot of deep dives from your side. I want to thank you. You two, Fortu and Isabel. Our next shows are on the 12th and the 30th of August. And with Mark Cashman and Sean Estrican. So I'm really happy that he will join us again. And the show with Mark Cashman is with Steve Corey, and we see us in with Fortu and Isabel together here with Sean Estrican. I would like to thank you, Drew. Amazing show. Last famous words to your side.
I don't think so. Just thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Drew.
Thank you
Was
so
great.
much. Have a nice day or evening.
Have a nice day.
For evening, night, whatever. Something like around this. I want to hear the song. I want to hear the song.
Your next customers don't need more ads. They need trusted signals. The M365 Show is where the Microsoft ecosystem shows up. Practical, community-driven sessions with real makers, admins, architects, and decision makers. When you sponsor, you don't interrupt people. You show up inside the conversation, where trust and context already exist. Sponsorship means brand visibility, a clear call to action, and content that keeps working through distribution and AI discoverability. Option 1. $99 a sponsor video up to 2 minutes, placed in an existing episode. Option 2. $699 one moderated show, with 1 or 2 guests, plus premium PR and AI indexing. And the power play, $2,000 the ultimate global distribution package. You're a sponsor in every show for 2 years, including 1 moderated show with 1 or 2 guests, plus premium PR and AI indexing. Because when Microsoft teams evaluate tools, they don't search for ads. They remember the brands that taught them something and showed up consistently. If you want visibility with real Microsoft practitioners and content that keeps working, sponsor the M365 Show. Visit m365.show and let's build your next pipeline moment.